Tingles with flyby.
Daily ASMR videos.
Hello, my tinglings, and welcome to a little how-to video on how to read upside down. Now, before we get into how to read upside down, we might first address the why of read upside down, because I don't think too many people are probably gonna just be sitting on YouTube and just be like, oh hey, I need to read upside down, why don't I, look up a video about that. If you have searched that very thing, you are amazing. I love you. So, I was reading this neuroscience book a few years ago talking about neuroplasticity, which is actually a fascinating topic that probably could warrant its own video. So, without going into too much detail about neuroplasticity, basically our brains are very moldable, and beyond just when we're kids, they're pretty much moldable all our lives. There's only very few things that they get very fixed on. And it's very good for us to be learning new and novel things. It's very good for your brain health. It's very good for keeping it active and knowing how to learn. And obviously learning is important all throughout life, as life is always changing. But it's also important so that you actually don't start to lose parts of your personality and other things. Anyway, so when I was reading this book, I thought, oh, hey, I need to, try to do some things that are going to challenge my brain in different ways. And I think lots of crazy things, so I was like, oh, okay, instead of thinking that crazy thing and then not doing it, although you all know I still do a lot of those things, I was like, oh, why don't I, instead, I'll do it. So, well, one of the things I was actually doing at the time is the top of a park bench, slightly on an angle. I was trying to teach myself to walk on it like a balance beam. I was actually getting pretty good at it. Oh, there's a paper down there that's crunching. Can I put my foot down? You can probably hear that. Anyway. But then when I quit my job, or probably when life got depressing at work, I stopped doing that as much. I've also stopped reading upside down that much as well, except, we'll get to that in a second. So the other thing that I started doing was I started trying to read upside down. And instead of just having everything just upside down, it's obviously going to be upside down and backwards if you still have things that are printed as they normally are. And I was happy enough with that. So I had read the book The Host before. I actually read about 100 pages of it upside down and backwards. And it took me, the first probably 5 to 10 pages, it took quite a while to kind of just get used to the shapes of words and how everything works and what's kind of going on there, because it looks different. And we do a lot of recognition of shapes of words, not just letters, and a lot of those patterns, and when they get turned around, they look quite different. But yeah, it was a lot of fun. And then when I started doing more videos where I'm trying to show you the book, being able to have that practice of already having read upside down a lot, I could still use a lot more practice to be more seamless with it, but it's definitely helped me a lot in just being able to feel confident enough to read upside down and backwards on camera while I'm presenting something to you. So that for me has been a really good reason to learn to read upside down, which isn't actually even the reason I did it, but once I could do it, it's been actually quite helpful. So the main thing we're going to do in this video today, we'll go through kind of in detail looking at each letter of the alphabet, and then I do have something fun for us. Don't know if you can read this, but you'll be able to read it hopefully by the end of this video. It says Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. We're going to start reading at least a page or two in there. So I hope you all are relaxedly excited about this. Or just chilling out and just being like, just keep talking in a soft-spoken voice and I'll just listen to what you say and not pay attention to any of the meaning because it doesn't matter. Anyway, so if you can't read this, down at the bottom we have upside down alphabet. So these are all in alphabetical order. So the first thing to note is when you are looking at something that's upside down and backwards, instead of looking at the top left, your first very beginning of everything is going to be in your bottom right section, right here. So we can see our A, and if you look at the A upside down, it looks a bit like a V with a cross across it. So you can see it's more that shape. Actually, it looks quite a bit like a V with a cross across it. And so you can start to think of an A in more than one direction, which is actually, it gets really fun like that. But if you look at this right here, just want you to kind of focus on it and see the A. Just think A, ah, as we look at the A. And the same with the lowercase a, although I hate those A's, I like just an A like. I can't write upside down very well. Like that. Actually, we could just draw it here. Oh dear. We're going for it. I feel like it'd be easier to write it from backwards. Kind of like that. Anyway, without the thing on the top. Could just do it like that. Anyway, so that is our A. So just think A, and that's our A. Now we're going to go into B. So instead of thinking of it as being upside down and backwards, the best thing is going to be to actually think about the shape that it is. So part of this is, this is a very familiar shape. Looks a lot like a lowercase q. And those are the ones that are actually the trickiest. So you want to think, when you look at this, this one is probably not too tricky because it just looks backwards. And so it just kind of looks like that shape, and you could just think baby. But if it was going to be baby, we'd have this up here. So, that lowercase one's going to be the tricky one there. With our C, C is not too bad either. Just looks a bit backwards. Just coming the other way. So, just look at that. Think C, calm, cow, collector. So, we have C. And then we have D. Again, the uppercase on the D is not too bad. This is where you're going to get tripped up. And this it does take some practice to really get used to these. But so you just want to see ba, da. Looks like a P, it's not a P, that's a D. So that would be dada. Even if it kind of looks like papa, it would be dada. So you have to start thinking in that way. Get your mental rotation going. Da, dog, dalliance, daring, dead. Just look at this letter, and that is your D. Here we have your E, S sound. That is actually quite a familiar letter to me as a linguist, because that's a schwa sound. But we'll get to that later. Not today, not another video. Yes, I do have an International Phonetic Alphabet video that will be coming. Can't promise when, but it will be probably a couple months away. But anyway, it will happen. So E, just see the E. So if you think we could actually make the word dead now, we can start making some words. D, E, A, D. So just, you want to start practicing it a little bit. And then we have our F. The lowercase f looks a little bit like a J with a cross through it. This looks like a backwards L with a line coming off of it. And you can start to think of these shapes not just as a 180 rotation, but for the shape it actually is at this orientation. The other thing that's really interesting is when you're reading upside down, you can see this here, is that the lowercase letters end up being towards the top. So you see the U, and then this, we know, looks like a D to us, but we know it's not a D because it has to be rotated. I know we haven't gotten to this letter yet, but that is a P. And then right here, we know what that one is because we've just done it, haven't we? It's a D, and then our E. So upside down. So we did our F, then we have our G. So G just kind of is sloping down, kind of coming. It's a C, backward C with a bit of a curve down, just really coming down through there. But coming down from the top like a lamp hanging from a ceiling or something like that. H looks the same, doesn't it? We're happy with that one. This one looks a bit like a loop. Also kind of like a Y, maybe. You might draw a Y like that. So this, remember, is H. Hot. Ham. Hamilton. It's our H sound. Or H letter. I, we're quite good like that. Probably you're not going to have too much issue with the dot since we only have 2 letters with dots. And the only thing you need to really pay attention to is a little loop up. Remember, it's going to be up like this for the J. Whereas like this, we have our dot. So we have the dot down at the bottom. Okay, and you're going to have the dot. It's going to be down rather than up. That's fine. So that's I, and then we have J. Okay, we have here, looks obviously a bit backwards, but if you mirror image it, it doesn't look too different. Just kind of think in a mirror. But that's our K. And then we have our L. That again looks a bit like a lamp, but instead of like our G that's all curved around, this one's just hanging off of a post, almost like a hangman's post. Of course, if it wasn't a serif font, it would just be like that, which is actually a lot like a hangman. And our L looks quite the same. When we get to our M, we need to start paying attention again to what we're looking at here. It looks a lot like a W, but not quite. But we have to remember, it's when you see these letters, you have to be aware of how they are in context, to remind yourself that you're reading in this orientation as well. So when you see this letter, basically you're going to think, okay, then the lowercase letter is down here, whereas if this was a W, it would be over here and across that way. So you start to think that way, and so the M will start to feel more like M, mom, many, mammy. Anyway, and the same with our lowercase. Our uppercase N, pretty easy, I think. It's reversed, but I think we're starting to get a little used to that, hopefully a little bit. Now this one's going to be tricky, and that is because it looks like a U. But the thing to remember is it's a U, but it's up. So if it was down here, if it was down at this line like that, it would be a U. But we know, oh, it's up, lowercase, and up for the lower case. It's got to be an N. So when you see that in this orientation, that means N. No, no. Now. Nuisance. Nobody's a nuisance here, though. So that's our N. O, I think we are great with O. Then we get to P. Uppercase P, again, I don't think is too bad. Crunching more paper over here. But here, that's where you see that D shape. But the thing to remember is, you think of the line here, and it's extending. You would never see a D that extends beyond the line of the uppercase. So that's something to keep in mind when it's going up like that. On a D, that's P, Papa, and Patsy, and Palm, and Pal. So we have our P. Q, I think, is not too bad. The tail goes the other way, and obviously it's upside down, but you would just have, you know, a little kind of bow with a fun little curve coming up to the top. This one, again, is going to be tricky, especially next to the Q. It's important to remember where your line is. When it's extending above the line, that means it's going to be a P or a Q. And one of the hardest things is actually, you may figure out that it's a P or a Q, but figuring out which one it is. So just remember that the P is the D, so pad, and then the Q looks like more of a B, so quab. But, so pad and quab. Quib, maybe. Quib. Squib, but anyway, quib. We'll say quib and pad, so, because you may need a couple little tricks, because when you're actually going through letter by letter until you get your practice down, you may need a bit of help in actually getting. So that one is one of the hardest ones, is the P's and the Q's. So just remember, P looks like a D, so it's pad. Q looks like a B, so it's quib. And it works the other way as well. So quib, and then so B looks like a Q. But remember where the line is. Nothing extending beyond the line here, so that's a B. Nothing extending beyond the line here, so that's a D. So little tricks that'll help you as you're reading upside down. Next, we have our R shape. Nice little round section with a V section kind of at the top. And then a little line and a little loop coming down. And that's your lowercase r. Our S's actually look exactly the same, except that the lowercase is in a different position. Our T comes down and across. Looks just like that. And then our lowercase t looks like, I feel like I'm going to do this the wrong way. Did I do it the right way? The curve. Yeah. Like that. It's our T. U. The uppercase is pretty obvious. And then again, we need to remember that N and U kind of are switched around. But the thing is to remember that it's got this space here. So you got a space between here. So the N isn't actually an N, because if it was an N, it would be down here. So it's got to be a U. So that's our little trick for that one. Just remember, if it's up like that, if it looks like an N, but it's the opposite, it's a U. It's one of our little tricks. Our V looks like a nice little mountain. A very nice mountain. We have a double mountain for a W, double mountain for a W here. Up a little higher, it's the little foothills in the back. Our axes look quite the same. That's very nice. We have our Y, EY, looking a little like a single mountain, maybe like a tent with a little pole sticking up. And then our Y, our lowercase y, that has that same shape with a little curvy bit coming off the bottom. And our Z just looks a little bit mirror imaged. So that is our full upside down alphabet. So now I'm going to test our skills with Harry Potter. Get to the first page. So you can see here our little M shape. Mr. and Mrs. Dursley of number 4 Privet Drive were proud to say that they were perfectly normal. Thank you very much. They were the last people you'd expect to be involved in anything strange or mysterious, because they just didn't hold with such nonsense. Mr. Dursley was the director of a firm called Grunnings, which made drills. So I'm just going to point out really quickly. Covered up my pencil there, so I'm just going to grab this. If we look at drills, you'll notice our little D symbol that looks a bit like a P. So pad, that's how we remember it's a D, and go across drills. He was a beefy man with hardly any neck, although he did have a very large mustache. Mrs. Dursley was a thin and blonde, and had nearly twice the usual amount of neck, which came in very useful, as she spent so much of her time craning over garden fences, spying on the neighbors. The Dursleys had a small son called Dudley, and in their opinion, there was no finer boy anywhere. The Dursleys had everything they wanted, but they also had a secret. And their greatest fear was that somebody would discover it. They didn't think they could bear it if anyone found out about the Potters. Mrs. Potter was Mrs. Dursley's sister, but they hadn't met for several years. In fact, Mrs. Dursley pretended she didn't have a sister, because her sister and her good-for-nothing husband were as un-Dursleyish as it was possible to be. The Dursleys shuddered to think what the neighbors would say if the Potters arrived in the street. The Dursleys knew that the Potters had a small son too, but they had never seen him. And then we go on and on. But you can see on the individual pages, you see how it kind of goes all together. And with practice, I was not this good the first time I read Upside Down. You, too, will be able to read Chapter 1, The Boy Who Lived Upside Down. So, thank you for joining me for this lesson today. If you do read something upside down, let me know down in the comments. Or should we say up in the comments?